In order to understand how all of this fits together, however, I think we need to start by laying out the complete timeline of events, beginning with Chris and Katie being stationed at the same base in December of 2015. After that, Katie filed for divorce from Seth in February of 2016 and a temporary restraining order against him in August of 2016. Meanwhile, Chris married Nina Gomez in the summer of 2016, and she became pregnant that September. Shortly after that, Nina moved home to Albuquerque, and she claims this is because Chris was not supporting her and encouraged her to get an abortion. Then, Chris was allegedly caught disposing of Nina's things in mid-April of 2017, and this was supposedly witnessed by his neighbors. Faith was born in June of 2017, after which Chris suggested that Nina move to his hometown of Hendersonville. After that move, Chris and Nina got in a fight over a text message from a female coworker of Chris's at the end of August or beginning of September 2017. And I want to be clear here that it was Chris who said it was a coworker. Chris filed a temporary protective order against Nina in mid-September of 2017, but lost the attempt to get a full protective order at the beginning of October, allowing Nina to return to New Mexico and file for divorce and custody there. We also know, based on their own words, that Chris and Katie were living together at the time of Sebastian's assault by that older boy, which can only have occurred in 2017 because Sebastian was 8 at the time. Chris and Nina's divorce was finalized in August of 2018, and Chris almost immediately filed a motion to sanction Nina for allegedly not following the agreed-upon parenting plan in October of 2018. Nina then motioned for permission to relocate within the state of New Mexico on April 12th of 2019, and Chris motioned to prevent it. Possibly as a result of whatever happened during those proceedings, on August 21st of 2019, Chris was ordered by the court to take 24 hours of parenting skills classes, as well as 12 hours of high conflict behavior skill training, which he objected to on September 3rd. So just to be clear here with the timeline, on August 21st, 2019, Chris received a court order saying he needed parenting skills classes. Chris's objection was rejected, and he informed the court of his completed courses on November 19th of 2019, and it seems COVID put a pause on the whole affair until Nina motioned to modify the parenting plan in April of 2021. The plan was amended in October, but there's no details on what any changes were or if Chris objected to them. Almost a year later, in August of 2022, Nina switched Faith from the local public school, Bosque Farms Elementary, to a Native American academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it was at this point that Chris motioned to relocate Faith to Tennessee and to grant him primary custody, because apparently this was an unapproved change in schooling. Nina, on the other hand, says that she moved her to the academy because it was closer to where the other two children went to school, and she was trying to make the commute easier for everybody. After both sides presented their cases for why this was bad versus why this was good, it seems that the court sided with Nina yet again. Interesting little tidbit about this is that about a month after Chris motioned to get full custody of Faith, he closed on the current Proudfoot home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Now, I can't say for certain, but that would suggest that he put the offer on the house in, July or August of 2022, before or when he filed for custody of Faith. Not much in the court record for another year or so, but in September of 2023, Chris requested a hearing, though the reason for doing so is unclear. The motion was for a written report on relocation, but beyond that, there's no information. Whatever the reason for the motion, however, on November 16th of 2023, Nina was ordered to appear before the court to show cause via Zoom, and that hearing was to take place on January 2nd, 2024. On December 27, 2023, Nina was served with the same order to appear before the court on January 2nd that she had received on November 16, 2023. And according to Nina, this whole thing with her being served those documents again was a setup to make her look crazy so that they could then, at the January 2nd hearing, file an emergency ex parte motion for modification of custody and a psychological evaluation of Nina, with the evidentiary hearing scheduled for March 5th, 2024. Before they got to that hearing, however, on February 26, 2024, Sebastian Rogers was reported missing at around 6:30 a.m. after Katie claimed she woke up and he was not in the home. Chris filed for a continuance in his custody case on February 29th and then again on March 19th before filing a motion to seal the records of that custody case on March 25th, which you may remember is the same day they appeared on Nancy Grace. Affidavits and subpoenas were thrown around for a few months after this until June 6th, when Chris filed an emergency ex parte motion which I believe was intended to force Nina to send Faith to live with him for the summer, per their parenting plan. Nina responded the very next day with an objection, but her objection was rejected on the 10th, and she had to send Faith to stay with Chris for the summer. The most recent update to this case, per the court records, as of shooting this on July 29th, 2024, is that Chris has filed a motion to return to the status quo and yet again sanction Nina, who currently, so far as I'm aware, has Faith. So, with all of that in mind, I want law enforcement to consider the following facts. Chris and Katie Proudfoot have avoided saying precisely when they met, and as we know, it's possible they met as early as December 2015. Katie accused Seth of doing many of the same things in 2016 that Nina would go on to accuse Chris of doing in 2017, and followed the same legal playbook that Chris would a year later when trying to take Faith. Chris Proudfoot has been married 5 times in about 25 years, he was in the military the whole time, and service members are known to sometimes marry just for the benefits. To elaborate on that, when Chris married Nina, he would have received better housing and benefits as a husband with 3 dependents, even after Nina moved back to Albuquerque, so long as she didn't divorce him. When Katie divorced Seth, she would have lost those same benefits, which would have downgraded her lifestyle. And we know that Chris married Nina around the same time that Katie kicked Seth out. We know that Nina did not move back to San Diego at any point, and that shortly after Faith was born, she moved to Hendersonville at Chris's request. And for most of this time, she stayed with Chris's mother. This put her in a position where she had no one around to support her if something were to go wrong with Chris or his family. In simple terms, she was as isolated as she could possibly be. At this time, Chris was still stationed and spending the majority of his time in San Diego, now without any possibility of Nina sneaking up on him, because his family could tell him if she were going to do so. When he did return to Hendersonville to help move Nina into their new apartment, he received a text from a female coworker, as he put it, which Nina interpreted to be romantic in nature, and she accused him of cheating. Now consider that Chris was in the Navy and stationed at a base in San Diego, and Katie was in the Navy and stationed at that same base in San Diego, meaning she could be considered a female coworker. As we addressed, Chris has been extremely cagey about when he and Nina met, but I think we can triangulate it. And here's how we do that. Chris said he'd been around for half of Sebastian's life at a time when Sebastian had just turned 15, which gives us a window of 7 to 8 years, or 6 to 9 if we're being generous. Seth said that when Sebastian was assaulted, Chris and Katie were living together at the time, which is something that the Proudfoots have confirmed in several interviews. Seth also said that Sebastian was 8 when the assault happened, which means that it must have happened by the end of 2017. On top of that, we know that sometime between mid-July of 2017 and the end of August 2017, Chris received a text message from a female coworker that Nina interpreted as cheating. If we put all of that together, then Chris and Katie started living together before December of 2017. And based on the fact that Chris allegedly received this message at the end of August 2017, it seems very likely to me that Chris and Katie began dating before Chris even filed that TPO against Nina. We also know that after the custody grab failed and Nina filed for divorce, Chris spent the next several years pestering her in court over every little thing and filing for primary custody multiple times. And since we know that Chris and Katie began living together at the very latest in December of 2017, we also know that Katie has been a parent in Chris's household since that point, and therefore she must have been involved to some extent in this custody case. She must have been an active participant of some kind. That is to say, at the very least, she was aware of these court proceedings. Now, if you recall that weird, vague story that Chris told from the very beginning of this episode, all of that seems to have happened sometime after the Proudfoots moved to Hendersonville, so that's probably between 2022 and 2024. They may have returned to Hendersonville as early as 2022, but that's the earliest I can confirm that they were there. In any case, when that Duchess panel asked Chris if there was a reason he wouldn't want Sebastian around his daughter, he told them, "There's some things that can be spoke of, and there's some things that will not be spoke of, and personal issues inside my family are strictly that they have no bearing on this investigation. The cops are well aware of everything involving specifics, and that's quite honestly, I know this is going to sound snarky and rude, but it's really nobody's business as to that because it has no bearing on this case. Okay, and for the record, I will say this, all 3 parents have an agreement and we all understand this." That was not an answer to the question, but thankfully Chris did tell us that all 3 parents understand this, and Seth told us that Chris didn't want Sebastian around his daughter. I would be willing to consider that this is kind of a he said, she said thing, if not for the fact that Chris all but admitted to it by describing an entire incident involving the cops and family members while actively shipping Sebastian off to Seth as he's vying for custody of Faith. Just to be clear, Chris most recently began making moves to get custody of his daughter towards the end of 2023, which is around the same time that he approached Seth and suggested Sebastian move in with him. We also know that Nina's story about what happened at the airport is at least somewhat truthful, because the court records show that there was a motion for a psych eval against her, paired with custody changes. To my knowledge, the Proudfoots actually haven't denied any of Nina's claims, though it is possible, if unlikely, that they're unaware of them. And in case Chris happens to be watching this, I'm perfectly willing to be completely wrong about you. In fact, I'd love to be, but you have some explaining to do. And finally, we know that the Proudfoots left town in the middle of the search after what has all but universally been described as a lackluster effort to find their son. And on top of that, we know that Chris has lied so very many times. Anyway, now that I've put all of that out on the table, I'm realizing how aggressively convoluted the whole thing is, and I'm just hoping that I've been able to lay it out in a way that makes sense for you. Now, for the last couple of weeks, I have been telling you guys that I have a hypothesis, and I have been sitting on it and not releasing what it is. And some people in the comments understandably asked if I was ever going to give the hypothesis, or if I was just going to keep saying I had one so that we could draw out as many views from this case as possible. I am assuming those people are not familiar with our channel. That said, I understand where they're coming from, and I was being legitimate when I said that I was holding off on it because I wanted to compile as much as I could first so that I would be confident about what I was suggesting. I am now finally mostly confident in my hypothesis.